Some grammatical reflection and an interwoven reflection on Geworfenheit. Um, I think that the grammatical reflection should be able to um, provide the possibility of this forest clearing, this Lichtung. I'm not sure that's right, but it has somewhere where this expression for a sudden opening when you're walking through the forest and there's a clearing, a lighting, um, which I think the image is defective when it's just given as the clearing. If it is Lichtung or however it is with the word licht in it, light. It's not a lighting or a clearing. It's maybe it is in a way, but I still think the image is important as an experience which Heidegger would have had as somebody who's walked along through forests and come to clearings. That's a specific um, metaphor, as it were. And so then we get to this grammatical question and metaphor too. That's a question of how does a metaphor fit into the overall theory of language. We do have in Heidegger a kind of casting over this of we have now, and that's a big part of what I think we have to reflect about this castedness, since it does have, this word does have the suffix height on it. It's not just Geworfen, but it's Geworfenheit. I think that castedness must be understood as being worthy of being thought constantly. It's not something that happened in the past, which just relates to the sort of sociological categories of that which we were by physis or by birth, and that therefore we didn't choose. So therefore it's not sufficiently authentic or individualized, but it's still in this old pre-modern sense where we're stuck in this Dionysian situation where we can't disambiguate ourselves from the masks we've been born into, the masks of our social groups, that which is so villainized under the current notion of progress, that which are supposed to be rapidly jetting away from, and which in a way fuels all the modern political problems. This increasing intensity of the desire not to be subsumed into this God whose face is a mask, Dionysus, and who doesn't let us make our choices, as we're constantly told we're supposed to have individual choices. If Nietzsche says something along the lines of, Nietzsche doesn't say quite, ich will Macht, so I want power. So will is a part of the verb wollen, which really means to want in German, and it points apparently to the future if you put that over it. But what I was thinking is we have these tenses, which are, Heidegger often tells us not to trust grammar, or that he's not trusting grammar in his investigation at some point. So how arbitrary is it that we have this kind of neutral tense, which stands as the indicative, so-called, which suggests that if I say, here is a flower, or even if I say, it's indifferent to the fact value distinction, really. If I say, I like flowers, this is meant to be, as it were, neutral. It's indicative of something which is, and it's tacitly taken to be the case by everyone, that this is a statement that says, and this is true, and that's true. I like flowers, and that's true. It's as though it weren't. It was as though it were the zero case, in according to the grammarians. This is the case, which this isn't really a case at all. But then there's these other situations where somebody says something like, "I, I want to like flowers," or "Ich will Macht." I want power. But so why isn't that also neutral? Why does grammar force us to think in this way that why is I want to like flowers, or I want power? Why isn't that a statement, as it seems to me it would be from the point of view of Facticitat of Dasein? Just straightforwardly, that's a statement of something that's true for Dasein, that Ich will Macht, I want power. But from the point of view of grammar, this becomes an inflected case, which is not simply an indication of something that is, but rather it's about the future. And then you get these funny theories, like Zizek has been, in his 9-hour lecture on Hegel at the EGS, he's saying, and for Hegel, this Ich will Macht, Zizek doesn't use this example, but I think this is how he's proposing it. This was never true at all unless you actually achieve it and get the power. Then we would know it was true. But while you're just saying, I want power, there's nothing to that. There's no, it's not the case at all. So it's like Hegel's agreeing with the grammar then. Or he's imposing a stricture on it. Maybe grammar's just says this is somehow off center, not pure indicative, but it's something else. But then Hegel says, in fact, the only time this only becomes true when we reach the indicative case, where we can say, I have power, and then with the tacit, and this is true, in parentheses beside it. This gets stranger when one considers the features of other languages that, so for instance, that ancient Greek has this peculiar case called the Heroist, which occurs in this incident where silver-shod Thetis, the mother of Achilles, comes to see him on the beach. I've been thinking about that example too, because this is also like the choice of fates with the judgment at Paris. This is a second example of that, where Achilles is faced with the choice of a long life along the lines of Odysseus, or a short life with great glory at the walls of Troy. And of course he chooses the Calon, the glory, this splendor, over the long life. And I suppose this truly seems to fit his character, and then it fits this model of the microcosm of personality, or character, and the macrocosm of the fate of that person. But being that aside, the reason I brought that up is because there's a special tense which is almost never used in, so far as I know, in Iliad, but it's used to describe the transport of gods, and it's used in that scene where the mother of Achilles is coming to visit him, and it has some special resonance within Greek, which is hard, which apparently, which perhaps we can't even think, because we don't, we're not in the habit of thinking that way, which comes out in examples which are a bit more clear, like this. Most languages have a passive and an active tense. But ancient Greek has this funny thing called the middle tense, and in fact the middle tense was totally predominant, and it doesn't express the same thing as we're used to, this he spoke, or he threw the ball, or actively, rather than the ball was thrown by him passively. It doesn't have really the passive tense so much. It has something called the middle tense, which does something funny, which isn't exactly like any ordinary way of speech in English. It has something to do with being more involved in action and more involved in hoping for the outcome. But uh, the thing is, it's part of the whole ancient Greek language, this middle tense, and would have been used constantly and habitually and without any special notice being taken of it. And we don't even have that at all. And even if we could, therefore, explain to ourselves what it means, which we might not really be able to, it wouldn't be part of our regular habit of thinking. Things like that, especially when they're brought into context with these metaphysical questions with Hegel and Nietzsche, um, make one think there's a certain context that can be felt that shows where Heidegger's differing from that when he comes to this glance, which seems to be more crystal clear than those other many-faceted metaphysical glances, because it's simply this glance at language, which is the fact is that the truth of being, rather than these grammatical inflections, which then suggest the order of time, as in the claiming you can't indicate this wanting something because it has to do with the future. I think, again, this to wrap it up, this in thinking the castedness, we have to think the castedness as not something that happened once in the past, but as a feature of Dasein, and that the castedness has to do with the meaning of things. And one basic way meaning is being inflected and being brought to us is through grammatical forms, and especially in this form where the structure, where they tell us where we are in time. I think in the full sense of Dasein, we really don't know where we are in time, and this is brought out partly in the castedness, and that castedness is only this movement of our very basic forms of understanding. One last thing I want to mention is that I'll lodge, let's say, a notice of disagreement with Zizek on his, so far as he really means what he says when he says, in being against bluffing, people bluffing and presenting themselves in fancy talk as knowing something that they don't really understand, which of course is very prevalent and happens. I think in saying the other side of that is to be able to say things clearly all the time. I think one can, the reason that's not true is because we can say clearly what the conditions are from breaking with that. And then we see that they're quite wide. For instance, the condition that somebody has a special facility for some subject matter, such as music, for instance, and we don't have the facility for it, and then they can't explain something to us which we could understand. But then why can't that happen even in the most basic things and in any dimension? Secondly, because there's a kind of fake it until you make it thing, which is not exactly fake it, but there's knowledge which is kind of half knowledge, but it really is half knowledge. And so it may be quite a few people who are very pretentious or seem to be pretentious and use big phrases, nonetheless can be kind of some way along the road to understanding something that someone who came along before them did understand, but they haven't quite gotten there. I think that's a real feature of the apprenticeship process of not being there and then, but having part of it, you see, because mastery doesn't happen at once, or it may be complete at once. It may the moment of mastery may happen at once, but it took a long time repairing it in some way or another. And thirdly, because I think Wittgenstein is onto something when he says, just because he says, if I do not perfectly understand what I am saying, do I thereby speak nonsense? I think one can sometimes not perfectly understand. Probably all the time we don't perfectly understand what we're saying. We only indicate so far as we can indicate, and then some indications are seemingly more worthy than others. But there's a certain style that comes out when you follow what Zizek is saying and try to make everything clear. But as soon as you bring in the standard that we can see the ground where things are no longer clear, and then we can say some people might have crossed this line, then you have to be prepared to consider there's cases that have crossed that line into the no man's land where shots may be fired, but we may cross over into this alien territory, and that's in a certain way, maybe that's what we have to do. And then, of course, there's the back and forth of the cave and the sun and back, as Heidegger describes it.